Now, welcome to another lightning response video, where this time we have a question from Vaughn Glover, who asked, "Hey Thor, I was wondering, do you think Leslye Headland is a qualified candidate to take on a massive franchise like Star Wars? Based on her body of work, she has done some independent projects that were hit or miss, but nothing on the level of arguably the biggest IP in the history of the world. I'd love to get your thoughts on this." Alright, so full disclosure here, I have never seen anything she's done. Not out of actively avoiding it, it's just never crossed my plate, if you will. I have heard of Russian Doll. I've heard good things about Russian Doll, both kind of generically online and from people I personally know that have seen it. But other than that, and I even, of course, looked her up on IMDb, but I don't know anything else she's done. I don't really know anything from her body of work beyond what I've heard about one of her shows. Everything else I know about her comes from articles or interviews I've seen, both new ones and old ones that I've gone back and watched or read, where she has certainly said some things that rub people the wrong way, or rub some people the wrong way, shall we say, and kind of make her sound like someone who is potentially more interested in inserting personal beliefs into Star Wars rather than trying to just make some really good Star Wars. Though at the same time, she has said things that do make it sound like she's a big and genuine Star Wars fan, and a fairly knowledgeable one at that. Though going back to some of those interviews she's done, she has said in the past, or told women in particular, to sort of fake it till you make it in Hollywood, to pretend you've been there and done that in order to get a job. She's even admitted that the first time she was hired to direct something, she lied and had no clue what she was doing. So is she just kind of pretending to be a Star Wars fan, learned a few things about it to sound like one, in order to get the job? That then brings us to the question, do you need to be a Star Wars fan to make good Star Wars? And, well, Tony Gilroy made, in my opinion, one of the best things Star Wars anywhere ever, that of course being Andor, and he's freely admitted he is not much of a Star Wars fan, though he also did have people around him that knew it, and obviously they kind of made sure he wasn't doing anything that didn't make sense for the franchise, or that completely wrecked the canon. He also has a rather lengthy and impressive resume. He has certainly done films that qualified him to do something like Andor, not to mention he'd already worked on Rogue One. Furthermore, or on the flip side here, there have been writers and directors who know Star Wars extremely well, who are big, passionate fans, no one will argue against that, and they ended up making, well, they've made some things that were less than great. Though we've also had examples from that same person or others who love Star Wars that make some really fantastic Star Wars as big Star Wars fans. And thus, when you weigh all that, I don't think knowledge of Star Wars is or should be the end-all be-all when it comes to making it, or the top determining factor on whether or not someone can or should be hired to create it. And that is honestly something I've kind of had a change of heart on, or thought twice about, or changed my mind about ever since Andor. Had you asked me that before that show came along, I would have said it's probably the most important thing, that we really need people who know and understand Star Wars above anything else. Though that said, it certainly still needs to be considered and is very, very important. And I'd argue that on average, you'd be much better off hiring writers and directors who not only know Star Wars, but do love it and are very passionate about it, who truly want to create great Star Wars for love of Star Wars, not for any kind of personal reason, either to further their career or pitch an agenda, whatever it might be. But at the same time, I do think that love of Star Wars can potentially sort of blind you, that you still have to be able to step back and ask yourself if what I'm making here is good in and of itself, not just good for Star Wars, or good because Star Wars fans will get it and appreciate it. I mean, we recently learned that Leslye Headland brought in a writer for The Acolyte that knows absolutely nothing about Star Wars, which I saw many people criticizing her for. But honestly, I think anytime you do Star Wars or work in any major well-known franchise that has so much lore behind it, you should always try to have someone in the writer's room who doesn't know it so well, so you can get that perspective as well, that outsider's perspective. You can see if you're actually telling a good story, or if you're just telling something that works for Star Wars fans only. In other words, I think you need a good blend in the writer's room, or some good give and take if you truly want to create top-notch Star Wars, or a top-notch show or movie, perhaps I should say. You will need that super fan in the room who will catch mistakes with the lore, who can maybe suggest things that will enhance it for the fans, But you'll also need that person in there who doesn't know it so they can tell you how a non-fan is going to see and react to the story, if they'll potentially even understand it and enjoy it or not. All that said, and going back to Leslye Headland in particular now, I think the biggest issue most have, and I think it is absolutely reflected in the like-dislike ratio on the trailer for The Acolyte. Anyway, I think the biggest issue people have with Leslye Headland is her time spent as an assistant to Harvey Weinstein, which she did for about a year from what I've been able to find online, and she was with the company for 5 years in total. And if you don't know who he is or what he did, do feel free to look it up. I am not going to go into all of that here, but let's just say it was really, really bad, and it involved taking advantage of women, which of course leads to the question of, as his assistant for roughly a year, did Leslye Headland know what he was doing? And there seems to be two lines of thought here. One being, how could she have worked with him for about a year and not known or had any idea what was going on? How could she work for a monster and do and say nothing about it? Then there will be those who will say, of course she didn't know what was going on. It is not like he would have been out there in the open with it, if you will. And though certainly people will believe what they want to believe on this one, the simple fact of the matter is we do not know what she did or didn't know. And that is not meant as a defense. That is just the reality of the situation if we are being completely objective. You shouldn't be held responsible for the actions of another person if you were truly oblivious to them. It is not your fault someone you knew or worked with at some point in time turned out to be a monster. Though if she did know and said nothing, and potentially worse yet, was in any way facilitating it, which again we have zero proof or evidence of, well, that would certainly be far, far worse, and we shouldn't be discussing whether or not she should be directing Star Wars. We should be discussing whether or not she should be in prison right now. Anyway, kind of leaving that subject behind, I think another question around Headland's hiring, as well as around, say, the hiring of Charmin Obaid-Chinoy, who is the director of the Rey New Jedi Order movie, it is if they got these jobs because they were believed to be the truly most qualified person for it, or if it's more because they got hired because they are women. And before you get all mad at me for even suggesting that, before you take to the comments to say I hate women for in any way questioning their hiring, I will first point out how unkind I have been to some of the men who have created Star Wars, and no one has ever rushed to their defense. No one has ever suggested I hate men for dissecting their movies in great length and detail. And also here, it's Kathleen Kennedy who sort of brought this all up long before I ever did. She is the one who has essentially vowed to bring more women into Star Wars, and that there will be a woman to direct a Star Wars movie, that she will make that happen no matter what. And when you do say something like that, you do, unintentionally, you cast this kind of shadow of doubt over any woman who is hired to do something Star Wars related. You make people ask if this is, again, the most qualified person for the job, or is it just Kennedy keeping her promise to hire more women? And in a way, I think this is very unfortunate and unfair to women, especially those who have done a fantastic job creating Star Wars, of which there have been many as of late. Though at the same time, there is actually this part of me that can, at the very least, understand and to a degree appreciate what Kennedy is maybe trying to accomplish here. That she wants to help women and girls get more into things like sci-fi and fantasy by hiring more women to write and direct it. Which isn't to say I think, overall, Kennedy is doing a great job at Lucasfilm. I think she's kind of doing the opposite. Or that it should be her number one priority to make sure women can love the franchise just as much as men. She should just be making Star Wars as great as she possibly can make it. I'm also not so sure she's going about expressing her desire to bring in more women in the correct or most helpful way. I think instead of always using absolutes, like saying she will hire more women or a woman will direct a Star Wars movie, she should say she'd like to see more women come forward and try for these types of jobs, that she thinks there are many qualified women out there who need to throw their hat in the ring already. Don't make it seem like you, Kathleen Kennedy, is making it happen, that you are the savior. Make it seem like the women out there are the ones making it happen because they are. So anyway, to start to wrap this up, I do feel like Leslye Headland was an odd choice, not the best choice to direct a Star Wars series, mainly because of her controversy with Harvey Weinstein, which is unfortunate if she had absolutely nothing to do with it, and is maybe even more unfortunate if she did, and now she gets to direct a Star Wars movie and face no consequences. But again, as I said, we do not know what is the truth either way, and so I will leave it at that. I also do have to admit that I have not seen any of her work, so me commenting on how good or bad her work has been in the past is irrelevant. And so all of that said, I will be watching The Acolyte, and despite concerns about how it'll handle the lore, which is always one of my top concerns no matter who is writing and directing it, as most of you know, I'm going to go into it as open-minded as I possibly can. As I have said, I will give it a fair chance, and I will honestly tell you what I think about it, good or bad. If it is somehow fantastic, I will tell you as much, and that will probably cost me some subscribers. And if it's terrible and I end up bashing it, well, that'll probably cost me some subscribers too, but at least you'll know what I honestly thought of it. Well, that's going to be all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about this whole Leslye Headland situation. Is she the right person for the job or not? Do you think The Acolyte will be good or not? Or you can always ask a question for a future lightning response video. All you got to do is start your comment off with "Hey Thor" and then ask away. But whatever you choose to do, leave your comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.